Hi, I'm Jason Hurd and welcome back to Subtone Music Academy. Today we're diving into From Flat to 3D, the producer's guide to depth and dimension. This is how you take a flat demo and turn it into a professional 3D sounding record where every part has its place in the mix. Depth of field is what brings a track to life. It's the difference between a wall of sound and a mix that feels wide, deep and musical. Now, one quick note before we start. Depth is easier to hear on good monitors in a treated room. Headphones can hide it because they bypass the natural space of a room. So practice on headphones, but always double check your mix on speakers if you can. Just to simplify, forward means louder and brighter and sharper and drier. Backwards means darker, softer and even more reverberant. Every tool we're about to cover today shifts those balances. Depth in a mix always starts with a fader. When something is louder, the ear interprets it as closer. When it's quieter, it feels further away. This isn't just about volume. It's about how our brain maps sound in space. In the real world, sounds that are closer to us arrive louder whilst distant sounds lose energy. So if you want a vocal or a lead to feel in your face and a bit more up front, it can't sit at the same level as everything else. It needs to rise slightly above the bed of the track. Usually that means 1 to 3 dB louder than the other main body of instruments. Supporting elements, pads, extra percussion, textures don't need to compete. In fact, they sound more professional when they're tucked in the background, maybe 2 to 6 dB lower. There's no rule. That distance creates contrast, and contrast is what makes you feel the lead feels more important. Now, here's the problem I see in so many mixes. People keep pushing everything to the front to be heard. The kick's too loud, the bass goes loud, then the pads get boosted, the hats get boosted, and then suddenly the mix is just a wall of sound where everything's there. Now, nothing feels close or far, it's just flat. Instead, think of it like building layers. Decide what deserves to be up front, what belongs in the middle ground, and what should stay in the background. Then use a fader to place each part. And if you're unsure whether something really adds value, mute it completely. Then bring it back in at the lowest level where it sits, contributes. If you don't miss it when it's gone, it doesn't belong in the mix. The best engineers in the world will spend hours making tiny moves, half a dB here, 1 dB there, because the balance is the foundation of depth and a great mix. It's your number one tool. All the EQ, compression and reverb tricks only work if the fader balance is correct. So let's have a look at that. So I've got my track here. Let's have a listen to that. Okay, it's quite a good balanced mix. It's not there yet, but the one thing that's standing out to me is that the clap is sat really far back. Okay, so what I'm going to do with that clap is just turn it up. That's too far forward, isn't it? Can you see how it comes closer to you in the mix and goes further back? You have to decide what's the best position in your mix. And the first thing I'll do, without any reverbs or massive EQs or treatment to each sound, is get them leveled in the mix, right? And if your mix isn't right there, then you haven't got a mix. But what we're trying to do is talk about depth of field, and the fader is the number one tool for that. So let's go to the acid on this track. So I've got an acid line here. Let's have a listen to that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the reverb and then turn it on. And you tell me how it sits in the mix. So just by turning the fader up, I brought that acid forward in the mix and I've made it feel like it's more of a lead. remember, you want your leads, the most important thing, like I talk about in a mindset for mixing and production, lead 1, lead 2, lead 3, lead 4. You know, if the vocal's there, the vocal needs to be at the front, and that'll be with a fader first of all. You know, if the acid's the lead, the acid needs to be up front in volume, and so on and so on. I always want the clap to hit through. And the thing about volume is this. You know, you can automate your volumes throughout the track, depending on what you want to be further forward in the mix. So for example, I may have the acid louder at one point, but then I might want the piano to be more important and turn the acid down or the piano up at that point. So we can use the fader throughout the journey to create a depth of changing field throughout the journey of your music. And remember, like I said, the last thing you want is everything up front, right at the front. You know, you've got to create it so it's got a bit of depth of field to the track. And that will also help you with your dynamics and the punch of the record, whilst not having to fight everything. And this also comes before your faders to sample choice, you know, recording things for the position of the mix to do with frequency and character recognition. Remember, contrast is everything. We don't want everything at the same position. We want things to be forwards and backwards in the mix. Okay, so now I've got the faders level and I've turned up the acid's further forward, but now my M1 organ's sat further back. So now what I'm going to do is turn the M1 organ up, okay? And this is why sample choice and position of the mix is important, because if I have to keep turning this up, other things are going to go down, and I have to keep turning everything else up, and that's when we get the brick wall, you know, that's when we get a flat mix. So I'm going to use my ears. I've chosen the sound for the position in the mix. I put it in a different position to the acid, and I put it on the sides, and I'm going to turn it up accordingly. I'm concentrating on the acid and the piano, making sure that they're up the front. And even though I'm tuning into the M1 organ, I'm mindful, hang on a second, it doesn't need to be as loud as those. It doesn't need to be as loud. You know, if using the meters helps you, then use the meters. But I would prefer you to want to try and train your ears and use your ears. So there's a part of me that really wants to turn that M1 organ up because I really like all the parts. That's where you're killing the depth of field in your mix. EQ is one of the most powerful ways to create depth in a mix. The way we perceive distance is closely tied to frequency balance. And in the real world, sounds that are close to us are brighter. They carry more high frequency detail. So as sounds travel further away, the top end is absorbed by the air, so they naturally become darker and duller. So in mixing terms, if you want something to feel forward, keep it bright and present. If you want to sit it further back in the mix, roll off some highs and soften the presence range. For supported elements, you can use gentle low-pass filters somewhere between 10 and 14K to take away unnecessarily top end. You might also dip into the 2 to 4K range. This is where the human ear is more sensitive. So reducing energy there pushes a sound back. For lead elements, do the opposite. Add presence around 2 to 5K to bring them forward. And if you want to add extra air, a gentle lift above 10K can pull them even closer. But here's the key. Always AB at match gained. Our ears interpret louder as better, so it's easy to trick yourself into thinking an EQ move improved depth when it just added volume. Think of EQ as a brightness control for front to back space. Bright equals near, dark equals far. Let's have a listen to the mix. Okay. I like where the bottom of the kick is, okay, but I want the kick to sit a bit forward, but I don't want the thump of the kick to come forward in the mix because I like where it is. So what can I do? Okay, well, I can EQ the top of the kick, okay? You can also do the same with like a multiband parallel saturation as EQ. But let's bring this up. So I've got a Pro Q4 here and it's got the thump. But I want to bring the top end of the brightness forward in the mix. So I'm going to try and figure out where the top of the kick is and bring it forward. Okay, that seems a bit better. The frequencies are a little bit lower in this particular kick. So it might be an idea to turn down the bottom bump and turn the whole sound up. But in this case, I'm just going to try and boost it and I'm going to turn this on and off. Okay, I like that there, but it's not blowing me away. So what might be a good idea is to try some parallel saturation using Spectre. It might sound better. I'm going to do the same thing. And even though this looks like an EQ, it's parallel saturation. So sometimes it is EQ, it's turning up the harmonics in that area. It's turning up the volume of the harmonics. But in this case, I preferred this to the Pro Q3. But as you can see, EQ is the first point where we can go to once we've got the faders right to help bring something through in the mix. Because we can target specific areas without taking the mix out of balance. Okay. Okay, I like it. I think I'd like the top of the clap to come through a little bit more. It just seems set back a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the clap and I'm just going to add a bit of EQ. Fantastic. It's brought it forward in the mix. Now, in my room, I've got 20 hertz here. I've got 20K. I've got the mids. I've got the sides. I've got left and I've got right. I've got forwards in the mix and I've got backwards in the mix because I've got a good depth of field in my room. And what happened was the clap came forward like here in the mix. And it did sound better and brighter at 10K. But I was being mindful that I was boosting it and it was kind of interacting with the hats in a way that I didn't like. So it was bringing it forward, competing with the hats. And I don't want to go and turn the hats up because we're doing exactly what we don't want to do. So what I decided to do was move it down and it still brought the clap forward, but in a different position, meaning we weren't affecting the hi-hats as much. And that's how EQ can carve out your depth of field within the mix. So that's bringing things forward in the mix, but we're taking things backwards in the mix. Let's have a listen to the track and see if there's anything we need to take back in the mix. Okay, let's say the acid's there and we've got the piano and I think the acid is slightly too forward a bit, but I like the body where it is. Maybe we just need to take the top end off a little bit. Let's go to the acid and EQ it to try and make it sit back further in the mix. Obviously, I'm doing it in extreme to show you, but this is also the way that I would do it. I would try and go to extreme like I do with all my plugins and listen to what it's taking out or listen to what it's adding and then just do a little bit. And did you see when I went to extreme how the acid really sat back in the mix? And then what you've got to do is find the level which is perfect for you so it's not too much in your face. And to be quite honest with you, I did prefer it where it was, and because there's nothing else in the track at this point. And this can really work with hi-hats as well. If you want your open hi-hat to be really up front and you want your 16s to be further back, you know, you can roll off the top end of those 16 hi-hats. So we're sitting one forward and one backwards. And this is something that I will do all the time. And I see this all the time with tech house and new producers. All your hats are really forward in the mix. If you're having to turn all your hats up, they're probably all too much in the same frequency, which is why I've chosen my samples for the position in the mix. Going back to the mindset for mixing and production course, you know, everything's got to have its position in the mix, but also more importantly, it's got to have its position of order in the mix. Lead 1, lead 2, lead 3, lead 4. The open hat might be lead 15. The closed hat might be lead 18. Okay, so you want to make sure that that lead 15, the open hat, is always a bit more forward in the mix. So remember, the brighter something is, the more forward in the mix it is. Okay, the darker it is, the further back it feels in the mix. And there's a key area between 2 and 5K, which our ears perceive to be louder. If you want to help sit something back, you might be a good idea to dip something in those frequencies. If you want it to come forward, you might want to boost those frequencies. And that will generally come to your leads, like your vocals or your pianos or the synth, which is driving your track. Transients, the very first hit or attack of a sound, play a huge role in how we perceive depth. I've done an in-depth video on transients that you can watch on my course. In the real world, sounds that are close to us hit hard and defined. Sounds further away are softened by the air of the room, the reflections of the reverb off the edges. In mixing, we recreate this with compression and transient shaping. If you want something to sit back in the mix, use a faster attack on your compressor. This clamps down on the transients, making the sounds feel rounder and less up front. If you want something to cut through and feel closer, use a slower attack and let the transients come through without them being compressed. The extra snap instantly makes it feel more forward. Transient shapers give you even more control. Pulling down the attack pushes the sound back, while boosting the attack makes it jump forward. So the principle is sharp transients equal closer, soft transients equal further away. That's why we'll boost the transients on the drums and try and reduce the transients on things that have got a bit of a sharper attack that we want to sit further back in the mix. Okay, there's two kinds of transient designers that I use. There's something that will boost the transient of the whole sound, of all the frequencies. But nowadays, like the multiband or like the EQ, I use a multiband dynamic shaper. So for example, let's have a listen to this mix. I might want the transient of the bass around 300 Hertz to come through a bit more. And I might have tried to boost it with the EQ. Let's have a listen to that. Okay, the bass is there. It's competing with a lot of stuff in the track. It's competing with the bottom of the piano. So what can we do? Can we add a transient designer? What I would do, and I would always do this, I would go for my transient designer. So I may use isotope neutron, which is really good. Depends what my clients use, or spiff. Okay, and I find the frequencies that I want to boost, and only the frequencies, and I'll give them a boost and see how that sounds. what that's done, it's just added a little bit more to the transient of the frequencies around 227. And of course, we can close this in or make it wider, whatever we want to do. And Spiff is really good for this. And this is, you know, if I've got a bass sound, which wasn't analog, which this has come from the Moog, so it is mono, but I can use this for the mid sides. It's a great tool. I use it all the time. And if you're trying to bring something forward, which part of it are you trying to bring forward, and where? Is it the middle? Is it the sides? Is it 200 hertz? Is it 400 hertz? Is it 6K? You've got to think like this when you're mixing tracks, because our levels all work together. We're just doing the finer kind of tunings here of everything. Or do you just want that snare as a whole from 200 hertz up to 10K to really come through the mix? Then just use a single band transient designer like SPL Transient Designer, and think about what you're trying to achieve. Let's say we've got the piano. Okay, so I'll get the piano and I do the same thing. Like I do with the EQs, like I do with saturation, find the frequency in extreme and just say, oh, that's what I want to come through more. Okay, so it's brought through the transient right at the top there. And notice I'm doing this in the mix. We're at a point now where we're trying to balance the mix out. Doing this isolation is no good for us, because let's have a listen to that piano in isolation. So 1K is really good. It's really helping that piano come through, but in the mix, it's up here at the top that's really coming through. And again, it's an extreme, so I would pull that down. AB it on and off, check the levels. And go, okay. I'm bringing that little bit of the piano through, so it makes it seem a bit sharper, okay. But it's doing it across the mix, and that's not really what I want. I'm not enjoying it in the middle, but I like it on the sides, okay? So then again, I'll go to mid side, and I'll go side only. See how that sounds? I really like what that's doing. Can you hear it? It's just adding a bit more transient on the sides, and I really like that because this piano is wide, and so it's not affecting the acid in the middle or the vocal when it's going to be there. And just for example, there's not actually anything I want to sit further back in the mix with this track, but let's get the clap. Let's go back to the clap. Let's just say it was a bit forward in the mix. I could get a transient designer on the whole sound. Can you hear that sitting further back? Let's turn that on and off. Big difference, okay? And of course I wouldn't use this much on it, but you know, using a transient designer can really help something sit further forward or back in the mix. And remember, we can choose the frequency because we have multi-band. So, and we can choose the left or the right or the sides. So whilst we're talking about the position in the mix, next let's look at stereo width and how that affects depth of field and makes things closer or further away. Stereo width and placement are powerful tools for creating depth, and we can learn more about that in my How to Make Tracks Wide course. The human ear doesn't just hear loudness and brightness, it uses width and position to judge distance. Sounds that are mono and centre tend to feel closer, more focused, and have more punch in the clubs that command attention. That's why kick, snare, bass and lead vocals usually sit right in the centre. They feel up front and solid. Wider sounds placed more to the sides often feel further away. Pads, shakers, and effects can be spread left and right to give the impressions of distance and space. But there is a balance. If everything is wide, the mix loses focus. If everything's in mono, it feels cramped and lifeless. So use stereo width strategically. Keep your most important elements in the center so they feel close. Push background elements wider to create dimension. And if wide sound is stealing focus, narrow some of the elements in it or fold the low end to mono to keep the mix tight. Think of stereo width as a way to position sounds, not just left and right, but also back to front. Okay, so I've got this on one organ. Let's listen to what it sounds like when I make it wider. Now remember, when you make things wider, you're turning the volume up, right? So when we make things louder, it's automatically better. So we always have to level match, okay? So in here, I've got a utility, okay? And I put the width on full. And I've got a Max for Live device called Volume Buddy, which level matches the before and after. So I don't have to worry about using this utility to change the gain. So let's listen to that. Normal and then wide at the same level. Okay, what that did was, when it was in mono, it was slightly louder, okay, because it was more in my face, it was there, it was right in front of me, okay, and when we made it wider and matched the level, it just seemed to sit back a little bit more in the mix, okay. You have to decide whether you want that central signal still there, and that's when you do it in parallel, okay, but what's happened is instead of that just being there and competing with the acid, adding the stereo width to make it wider has made it wider, so it's not in front of the acid, but it's sat it further back as well. Let's listen to that in the mix. I'll turn it up a little bit just so you can hear it. I mean, that was extreme, but what a difference. I don't feel like the M1 organ is fighting the acid when it's stereo spread. And, you know, it's to taste, whether you want more in the center, more on the sides, but this just shows that making things wider can sit things further back in the mix because they're not as direct. And again, if you still want that directness, but you want to make things wider, you can watch my video on how to make sounds wide and make your mix wide. And you can do this in parallel. Still add some extra side information, okay, but keep the central information still there, punching you in the face, which is not the same as just trying to sit something back. Okay, so the punch and the forwardness comes from the center a lot of the time, which is why I like my sub bass in mono, my kick in mono, my clap in mono. Sometimes sometimes like it wide, but I still like the punch in the middle. Okay, open hat a lot of times in the middle in tech house and house music. There's no rules, it's whatever sounds best to you. But if I want things to sit back, I will make them wider. But you can also pan them. Panning things left and right will take away from that punch of the center of the track. So remember, the more something is towards the center, the more forward it kind of feels in the mix. And that further, if you want to widen things a little bit, you can sit them back a little bit. But if things are sat back a little bit too much, sometimes bringing in the stereo field can give them a slight movement forward. That's the foundation of From Flat to 3D, the producer's guide to depth and dimension. We've covered faders, EQ, compression and stereo width, the tools that build the base layer of depth. If you want to go deeper with reverb placement, dynamic sidechain, automation, parallel tricks, and a full Ableton case study, that's all inside part 2 of this guide, available now at Subtone membership. It's £10 a month from the website, cancel anytime at subtonemusicacademy.com. And you also get all our courses, a mindset for mixing and production, the ultimate guide to mixing kick and bass, and Subtone Essentials, which is videos like this, and how to make your drums more interesting. Hit subscribe and let's keep building depth in your mixes.